Hello, yes, a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening to you, however you may be listening and wherever you may be listening. This is the latest edition of the Border Sports Media NFL podcast coming to you after something of a longer hiatus than I had planned. I did say in the last episode that I was going to move this to bi-weekly during the NFL offseason just because of the lack of big news there is to talk about, which meant I was meant to record last week. However, I became ill and I just didn't have the time to find another gap to record in the midst of my recovery. So I've pushed it to this week, and in a way, I'm slightly grateful because it meant I had an extra couple of days to anticipate and analyze and there's a word that I can't quite work out, but it will come to me. Talk about one of the events that we will be talking about in the latest, or rather the later part of the show. It involves what happened last night in Pittsburgh, if you can sort of hint what's going on. So yeah, if you can kind of guess what I'm going to be talking about, you should know by now, based on what the vast majority of my off-season talk has surrounded. But before we get into the topics, both big and small, I just want to do the simple admin, which is as easy as saying thank you very much for listening and tuning in. Don't forget that if you are new, you can like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform it is you are listening to. And don't forget you can follow us, subscribe, whatever the word and correct terminology is, on our social medias. We are at Borden Sports Media on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And then on Twitter, we are at MRB Sports Media. So feel free to give us a like and a follow and whatever the terminology is on those platforms. And then if you are a returner listening, then as always, thank you very much for your continued listenership and making me a small part of your week. Right, and with that being said, we've been away for far too long, so let's just dive right into it. And the first thing I want to discuss is, again, this isn't necessarily news, but this is a theory that's been put out by Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk. And again, it's just a theory, it's just an idea that he has at this point. There's not, as far as I've been able to ascertain, there's no further concrete sources to it, but it's a pretty interesting idea that he has proposed. And it involves the Chicago Bears and the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, the Chicago Bears are trying to finance build a new stadium. It's actually a pretty good stadium. If you've seen what the artist renderings are of it, actually looks pretty good. But the thing is, they're having trouble, as all teams will do. They're trying to find some funding for it, and they're trying to get it through municipalities and governments and sales tax and whatever. Basically trying to do what they can to not pay for it themselves, essentially. That's nothing new when it comes to and that's nothing new when it comes to NFL stadiums. Everyone will try it. But what Mike Florio has suggested is their way of getting around the situation is he has proposed the Cincinnati Bengals move in as co-tenants of the new stadium in Chicago. Although technically it's not in Chicago. I know this is one of the weird geographical things that often happens. Like the fact the Buffalo Bills don't play in Buffalo, they play in Orchard Park, and the Giants and Jets don't play in New York, they play in New Jersey. Those sort of wiggly things. But it's going to be in Lakefront or Arlington Heights has been talked about, but it's in the Chicago region. But you get what I'm saying. Is the Bengals would move in and be co-tenants with the Bears. And he believes that if the funding were to come from 20 NFL games a year, because it'd be every team would have the 8 regular season games and the preseason and possibly postseason, but you're looking at around 20 at a minimum each season. And then because the Chicago Bears are talking about having it at the Dome Stadium, that you'd be able to have things in the off season, and the teams would be able to have their different things. If the Bengals were to continue as they are, move on to the postseason, that's extra revenue. All these sorts of things that would be able to play into basically to pay off the stadium rather than looking to go elsewhere. Now, when I first thought about it, or when I first read this, I thought it was a little bit crazy. However, the more that I thought about it, and the more that it kind of, again, I'm not saying it totally makes sense. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but the more plausible it is. Because if you look at where the Cincinnati Bengals are at with Paul Brown Stadium, I know they've got a sponsor name, but it's one of these things. It will always be Paul Brown Stadium to me. Even though I'm not a Bengals fan, it just feels right. It's always going to be Paul Brown Stadium to me. But they have a lease that is basically ending at the end of this current season. And as Mike Florio notes in his article, I'm just going to quote directly here. Enter the Bengals. They're less than 3 months away from the final countdown to the expiration of their lease at Paycor Stadium. That's what it's called. During the league meeting this week, Executive VP Katie Blackburn said the quiet thing out loud. After 2025, the Bengals can go wherever they want to go. Basically saying that, as of basically now, they do have an option to extend on or before June 30th, 2025. But after that, there is the possibility that the Bengals could move. And I think, again, when you look at it, again, the more I thought about it, the Bengals aren't necessarily one of these. Again, I understand they will be important to to the city of Cincinnati or whatever, but they're not one of these. They are one of the in the great respect of one of the newer teams in the league. No, they were founded in the 60s. This isn't one of the teams like the Packers and the Bears that go back to, the 1920s, and the Cardinals, I think technically counts like the 1800s, I think, depending on how you want to work there, or the Steelers and the Eagles and the Giants, they go back far beyond that. No, in NFL terms, the Bengals are, not new, but they're not as old and they're not as traditional as you were as some of the other teams. So they're not. It's not necessarily. No, what I'm saying, it's a football hotbed. I get that, but is the league really tied to a city like Cincinnati the way they are with Green Bay, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York? Really, I don't really think so. You could say the same sort of thing with like the Seattle Seahawks, for instance. I don't think the NFL is necessarily tied to Seattle as a quote unquote traditional market. I think Cincinnati falls in that same range as well. So if you really want to, why not? I again work it out some way. The Bengals in Chicago, one of the bigger cities of America. Why not make it? Why not make it happen? You know, they're a city that's big enough to support two baseball teams. The Cubs and the Cubs and the White Sox. I know that it's a sort of thing. I gather this from Shameless and other TV shows, so some of it may be stereotypical, but you also gather from other actual sports shows that there is some truth to it. That if you're from the South Side, you support the White Sox, and if you're from the North, then you support the Cubs. I think it could work in Chicago. I think that is a football hotbed market. That is a traditional market. I think if you brought the Bengals there, I think there would be some, there will be some, stay over from the days in Cincinnati, but I think there would be a sizable market of people not necessarily change their affiliation, but you've got new fans, whatever, young fans who aren't maybe as tied in to the Bears, but then they see Joe Burrow being the quarterback of one of the teams, and they think, oh, I'm going to support the Bears. I think it is absolutely a potential idea. Now, again, there is still a long way to go about this. And if I'm being brutally honest, I don't think it will happen. I think there will always be some way for the Bengals to stick around in Cincinnati again. If it's a new stadium, even though Paul Brown is relatively, relatively new. It's around the turn of the century, rather, sort of stadium. I think they will want to make it happen. They will want to make it stay. The city will want them to stay. I think the team, again, in that heart of hearts, whilst it is mentioned as a possibility to move, I think in that heart of hearts they will want to stay. So I don't think it will happen. But if you're talking about, if the Cincinnati Bengals decide to move, which is not necessarily out of the realms of possibility, which would make more sense? Move to an established city like Chicago, or be one of these teams that moves to, one of these, I'm not going to say experimental cities, but one of these ones that the NFL has always talked about opening up to, like Louisville is always talked about that, and that's in Kentucky, which is, if anyone knows about, if you know about the geography of Cincinnati, it's literally right across the river from the state of Kentucky. So move to Louisville, you've got a pretty solid fan base there already, and it wouldn't have to be too far of a move. There's always talk about whether or not they want to move to, Salt Lake City or Portland or San Antonio or all these, Orlando. There's always these talk about, London as well, if you want to go there. There's always these talk of those cities. Which would make more sense? One of those cities or Chicago? I think it would be Chicago. Again, I don't think it will happen, but if they were to move, I think Mike Florio's theory might actually have some small semblance of legs to it. So that'll be interesting to see how that moves going forward, and especially around the end of June, where they have to decide what they're going to do with the lease on their stadium. Right, and on to our second topic of the week, and this one surrounds the upcoming NFL draft. And this isn't going to be talking about one specific position or one specific player in particular. This is going to be a general topic. And this stems from, ironically, someone talking about specifics, because Omar Khan, the general manager of the Pittsburgh Steelers, recently gave some comments to the Steelers in-house media team, where he talked about the draft and their plans or whatever. And there was one sentence there that kind of struck out to me. And it was, our goal is always to put ourselves in a position where we don't have to take a guy at a specific position. And then he goes on to say, and this is sort of something that's been the mantra of the Steelers for for a number of years, is that the way they approach free agency and the way they approach everything before that is they go into a draft not need. I mean, there have been some exceptions. The Kenny Pickett year being arguably the biggest one, but for the most part, they go in not needing any particular position. So they will go in and they will just take the best player available or whatever. They go in, they can, they've got a few holes or whatever, but rather than saying we're going in and we need to get a defensive lineman as number one, or we need to get a wide receiver with our number one pick, they say we can go this way, this way, this way, this way, and then just wait to see how the draft basically folds out. Now, I'm not sure if that is the best way to go about it, but at the same time, I kind of understand and somewhat respect it as well, because there are pros and cons to it either way. Because if you do go in needing a certain position, then a couple of things can happen. You can either be so fixated on one player, on one, again, for the sake of argument, one defensive lineman, and you just completely ignore everything else that has gone around. So, you are there looking for defensive lineman number one in the draft. But also, but in the back of the mind or in the back of the room, there's the corner position that hasn't really been focused on for 2 or 3 years, and the players are getting a bit old, or their abilities have started to detract. When really, you can do some twiddling around, and you may want to focus on the corner because the corner is the better player in the draft. There is that potential. There is also the potential that if you are fixated on one position and you are fixated on one player, for instance, then what happens if someone else comes and jumps you in a shock move? Again, you can plan as much as you want. You can say, right, we know that number one for this year, for example, Cam Ward's going number one to the Titans. I think most people have sort of got that. But then what happens, the talk about number two, it's either going to be Abdul Carter or it's going to be Travis Hunter, again, is the most of the talk. But if you're someone that is so focused on Travis Hunter, something we're going to be talking about later, if you're so focused on Travis Hunter and getting him, what happens then if you expect the Browns to take Abdul Carter and leave you to get Travis Hunter, but then the Browns get Travis Hunter? Then all of a sudden, all your prep and everything has gone completely out the window. So then you are basically scrambling on draft day to try and find the next best thing. And if that position is corner or wide receiver because of Travis Hunter, then you're going to be getting effectively second or third best when you could be getting the best at something else. So it's a bit of a risk, but at the same time, I kind of understand it because if you go in not needing any one position, then your world is sort of open to you. If you're not necessarily taking a relaxed attitude to it, but if you're just taking the best player available, as long as it's not an obvious one, like you already have your franchise quarterback and the person that's coming up with the next pick and the best player of the draft is a franchise quarterback, barring that exception, then you can just take that and just slot them in wherever you like, and there's not as much pressure as it was because you've got all these great players and you can sort of make it work. But I feel again this can come back to haunt you as well, because if you're taking it that sort of attitude, have you really focused on or as honed in on a single player or done as much research on a particular player that could be that hidden gem that you want. When really you'd say, okay, if you come to it, we'll get to you, so on and so forth. When really you should be honing in on that player and working out, right, is he the best player in this, or are people overhyping him, say, and we can go somewhere else. So it is a risky venture either way. If I want to know, I mentioned Kenny Pickett earlier. Just look at the example. If you go back to his draft, if they go with the thing of best player available or needing position of need, neither one of them really worked out because they tried to go in without a position of need. That was the one year they had a position of need of a quarterback, and they got it wrong. And you look at who was coming after him. You know, I'll just look at the first round, for instance. Back to back to back, Dallas Cowboys, Ravens, and Jets took Tyler Smith, Tyler Linderbaum, and Jermaine Johnson, all players who I think you could make a pretty sane argument have been better than Kenny Pickett in the NFL. So again, was he really the best player at the position? Not really. You went in with the position need. Did you get it right? No, because again, who was the last pick of that draft? It was Brock Purdy. So either way, it didn't quite work out for them. So either way, I just want to know, is that the right way to go about these sorts of things? Should you go into the NFL draft with a best player available mentality, or should you go in basically gambling and putting all your hopes on getting one guy? Let me know what you think in the comment down below or reaching out on social media. Which strategy do you think is best? Honing in on one player or just taking the best available and hoping for the best? Let me know. Right, so with the two main topics out of the way, it's time to move on to the smaller topics of today, and a couple of small ones that, again, just caught my eye in the past couple of weeks while I've been away. The first one is Jerry Jones, owner of the Dallas Cowboys. I don't know if I really need to say that, but I don't know. It's just automatic that I have to say it. I like that. Basically saying that he doesn't think that there is any major rush to get a deal done for Micah Parsons. Now, Micah Parsons, again, in the discussion to being the best defensive player in the league. Again, if you want to say he's the best, you can. He's certainly in the discussion. Saying that his contract is not urgent. We are there. I don't view it as urgent at all. Which, given the way things have gone previously for the Dallas Cowboys, I just don't know if this is. I don't know if Jerry's on the right side of history when it comes to this, because this is exactly what happened when he delayed and delayed handing Dak Prescott his contract. It was, at the end, it became too big, and I still maintain it's going to hamper them because there's no way that they are going to be able to make it work with a proper team of Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons. I always said that one of them was going to have to go. If not, then they are, basing a whole bunch of basically tying everything to those three players, and you basically then got nothing left to pay for the rest of the team, which is a very risky strategy to go down. So whilst Jerry Jones may not think it's urgent, the longer this goes on, the longer that Micah Parsons doesn't have his contract. And again, if he goes and has an incredible season this season, which is, again, not out of the realms of possibility, he's been fantastic in every year that he's been in the league, then that price is just going to go up and up and up. And Jerry Jones will effectively, he will regret not giving him a contract any earlier. So for him to say it's not urgent, I think is rather ridiculous. The second comes from a man that I talked about earlier, and it's Travis Hunter, thinking that he can play both ways when it comes to the NFL. Now, Travis Hunter made his name in college being able to play on both sides of the ball, as a wide receiver and as a cornerback. And I just don't think that's going to work in the NFL. Again, I'm not disputing. I'm sure that whichever one position he picks, I think most people are saying he's going to play wide receiver, but whichever position he picks, he will excel at. And I'm not, ruling out the possibility that there are some packages that whoever drafts him, that he can play. Maybe it's in goal line packages. I know there was a time where, for the life of me, I can't remember. I think it was one of the Patriots wide receivers. I think it was Wes Welker, maybe Julian Edelman. I even think, going back to my days on playing Madden, I could swear Randy Moss would play cornerback a couple of times as well for the New England Patriots. So just the one-off plays, fine. We can work with that. Again, certain packages, goal line, fine. But to expect him to play both ways in the NFL, I just don't think that's going to work. It can work in college where, not to disparage the play on the college level, but you can play against some pretty bad opponents in college in comparison to the NFL. I don't think you're going to be able to get away with that, especially the physical toll that it would take. So I don't think he's going to end up playing both ways. I think he'll pick one. Next, and it's the news that I've been discussing a couple of times, most notably on the last podcast, about playoff reseeding and the changes that had been proposed by the Detroit Lions when it came to the changing of the playoff seeding format. That if similar to how the Minnesota Vikings this year, even though they had the better record, had to go on the road to the Los Angeles Rams, then you have the situation and the proposal that's been put forward by the Lions that effectively, if you have the higher seed, then you get the home playoff game. However, reports have come out to suggest that it wasn't necessarily the Lions that came up with this. So this story comes from Pride of Detroit, which is an SB Nation website, but I know, but yes, that's where it's come from. So basically, Lions receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown basically comes out and says in the media that he doesn't like the rule. Now, this was ahead of the game against the Vikings and obviously the potential jeopardy for the Lions. He said, "It's crazy. I think the rules should be changed. Obviously, if you win the division, you should obviously make a playoff spot. But having a 14-win team having to go on the road is kind of crazy, but I guess I don't make the rules." Those comments get caught by the NFL. Again, I'm paraphrasing the comments here. Again, it's from Pride of Detroit, SB Nation, and the reporter is Jeremy Reisman. So I'm taking his reporting but paraphrasing. Basically, the clip goes to Troy Vincent, the NFL's executive vice president of football operations, who then gets on the phone to Rod Wood, who's the president of the Detroit Lions, and says, "I tend to agree with St. Brown. Would you mind partnering with us on making a proposal on that?" So we made a proposal. That's what Rod Wood told. So effectively, this wasn't the Detroit Lions that came up with it. This is the NFL that came up with it. And when I was struck by this isn't necessarily a good, bad, whatever. I understand the idea of the teams having to propose the idea itself, because there's that idea of democracy, and the ideas are coming from the teams rather than from Roger Goodell and he's being all powerful on the league and everything. I kind of get that. Again, it works in other sports as well, but I feel there are some things I feel, does this really need to go through the teams to make it? If this is something that the NFL wants, then why doesn't the NFL just propose it? Why do they have to go through this back way of having one of the teams propose it? Just bring it up yourself, or something like this. If you think it's that important for the league, and again, maybe not want to get too political here, but using an executive order, as it were, similar to the president of the United States, just say it. Just have one situation a year where you say, right, this is the NFL's decision. We're not going through the. This is what the league wants, and then just do it. I just don't understand it. So I thought that was a little bit of an interesting twist. That this idea didn't necessarily come from the Lions. They were basically nudged by the NFL to say, "Hey, we're okay with this idea. Could you put it forward to us so it doesn't look like it's come from us?" I don't see what the issue is. Just propose it yourself, and then we'll come around to it. I just think it was slightly weird. And finally, the final story of this part of the show, and this revolves around Aaron Rodgers. And basically, this one, I'm going to get slightly. I don't know if angry is the right term. Maybe annoyed. I don't know. But if you've seen the news as become around, Pat McAfee had a big show in Pittsburgh on Wednesday night, and I say everyone, but it was started by Mike Florio, but again, it was leveled in some level of truth and possibility. That the belief was that, or the rumor was that his belief was that Aaron Rodgers would basically announce that he was going to sign for the Pittsburgh Steelers during the show, which led to a couple of possibilities. It was either going to be Aaron Rodgers announces he's going to sign with the Steelers, which during the show, which kind of shows that basically Aaron Rodgers is running the show and running his own thing, and basically the Steelers have lost control and are ceding control of the situation to Aaron Rodgers, which which doesn't sit well with me. My feelings about Aaron Rodgers, the player, and now if we're turn this into a circus, it's not for me. Then there was the other possibility, which would have been slightly better, but still not great, they were going to announce the signing on the Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon, and then his appearance at the Pat McAfee thing was going to be his first appearance. Pat McAfee would introduce him, and this afternoon he'd signed a deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Please welcome Aaron Rodgers. Yada yada yada. Either way, which is slightly better, but still annoying because then we're still molding the announcement around this show. Doesn't sit well with me. Thankfully, it didn't happen, but also annoyingly, it didn't happen. And now we're sort of right. If not now, then when is Aaron Rodgers going to make up his mind, or is this going to be announced? Because, as I said, this time last year, the fact that he wasn't fully committed during the offseason with the Jets, I think really hindered what happened during the regular season. I think it's exactly the same for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if he's not fully committed, we saw the comments from Cam Hayward. You've got to paraphrasing, but if you want to be a Steeler, be a Steeler. If not, then just go away. Make the decision now. Sign up, get in, get your whatever your number is, get to South Water Street where the Steelers practice facility is, and be a Steeler and get ready to be a Steeler. We can't be having this. So again, it's come down to if not now, then when? Especially with the draft around the corner. Do the Steelers need to draft a quarterback to do something? And which kind of quarterback is it going to be? Is it going to be a serviceable backup in the 6th round? Or is it one of these potential franchise guys that, not good enough in the 1st round, but maybe in the 2nd round that they go for? So much is riding on this, and he's just dragging this all along. So it doesn't sit well with me. And again, I'm slightly angry with it. So if not now, then when? Hopefully never, but you kind of get the feeling that it is going to happen. But anyway, just assume it isn't. And finally, for the final story of the week, taken away from the world of football and somewhat funny story this week is Cody Bellinger, an outfielder for the New York Yankees. This is moving into baseball. Has apparently succumbed to food poisoning from eating some bad chicken wings. Now, this may seem like a bit of a mundane story. It is just, I'm sure everyone's got food poisoning from eating chicken wings at some point in their life. But the fact this has happened to a professional athlete just makes it kind of funny because you imagine, again, they are allowed, cheat days and whatever. And, I imagine maybe for pitchers, starting pitchers, once they pitch on a Monday and they're not pitching again until Friday, I imagine on that Monday night, they probably let themselves go a little bit because they've got all those days to recover and get ready. But even so, for an outfield player, just to suffer food poisoning from an everyday kind of food, it just makes it funny to me because you'd think that these are athletes that have, special diets and only really eat food made by their own chefs or the team chef. And for him to still come out with, the case of bad wings and get food poisoning, I just think it's quite funny. And I'll be honest, I'm amazed this doesn't happen more often. Or maybe this is why it doesn't happen that often because he ate some bad wings that, the team chef didn't make, and no one else really gets food poisoning because they eat the chef's food. But anyway, that's just I just thought it was a little funny. But that does bring us to the end of the show, and yeah, that is it for this week. Hopefully, we'll be back to 2-week bi-weekly thing rather than 3-week break. This would make sense because obviously 2 weeks time is the NFL draft, so hopefully there'll be some tidbits, maybe some trades, maybe some news that we can discuss. But either way, whatever happens, we will be hopefully discussing it then. But it just leaves me to say thank you once again for listening in. And don't forget, if you're new and if you like this show, then don't forget to like and subscribe on the podcast platforms. And you can reach out to us on our social medias, which is once again at Baldwin Sports Media on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and MRB Sports Media on Twitter. So feel free to reach out to us there. And again, if you are a returner, then thank you very much, as always, for listening in and making me a part of your week. That's it. And all that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much. And until I speak to you next time, take care. And as always, stay safe.